At the engagement dinner, they put me at the kids' table. I ate in silence and had the wedding dress I paid for returned. If you're watching this, subscribe to my channel and comment where you're watching from. This is a story about how I lost everything and then found something more valuable than I ever imagined. The hostess led me through the restaurant, past tables of elegant diners, sipping champagne beneath crystal chandeliers. I clutched my purse, the good one I'd bought 15 years ago for Richard's law school graduation, and tried to ignore the tremor in my hands. "Mrs. Mason, your family is seated right over here," she said, her smile never reaching her eyes. I followed, expecting to join Richard, Victoria, and the Whitmores at the main table. Instead, she stopped beside a small round table tucked in the corner where 3 children under 10 were coloring on paper placemats. "This must be a mistake," I said. "I'm here for my granddaughter Charlotte's engagement dinner." The hostess glanced at her seating chart. "The Mason Whitmore party, correct? This is your assigned table." My son Richard appeared beside me, his hand on my elbow, grip just tight enough to hurt. "Mother, there you are. We've been waiting." "Richard, there's been a mix-up. They've seated me with the children." His smile remained fixed, eyes darting toward the Whitmores. "It's not a mix-up. We thought you'd be more comfortable here. The main table is quite lively." I felt it then, that hollow punch to the chest. "But I'm Charlotte's grandmother. I've contributed $20,000 to this wedding." "Which we appreciate," he whispered, leaning close. "But seating arrangements have been finalized. Victoria worked hard on this." I caught my granddaughter's eye across the room. Charlotte looked away quickly, pretending not to notice my predicament. "I'd like to sit with the adults," I said, voice wavering. Richard's expression hardened. "Mother, please don't make a scene. Not tonight." My daughter-in-law Victoria appeared, champagne flute in hand. "Is everything all right?" "Your mother wants to change seats," Richard muttered. Victoria sighed. "Eleanor, we've already organized everything. Please don't be difficult." I stood there. My life savings poured into a wedding where I wasn't even worthy of a seat at the main table. Across the room, my old friend Harriet watched, her eyes narrowed with concern. She made a small gesture, offering to intervene, but I shook my head slightly. "Fine," I said. "I understand." I took my seat beside a little boy with chocolate smeared across his face. He looked up at me, confused by the old lady joining their table. "Are you somebody's grandma?" he asked. "Yes," I said, unfolding my napkin. "But apparently not tonight." I watched as Richard and Victoria rejoined the main table, laughing too loudly, pouring more champagne. Benjamin Whitmore, Charlotte's fiancé, glanced in my direction with a furrowed brow before his mother distracted him. I picked at my salmon while the children bickered over crayons. 40 years of teaching other people's children, then another 15 managing school finances. All those extra hours, all the nights I'd gone without so Richard could have everything. The mortgage refinanced to pay for his college. The vacation fund emptied for his first car. I cut my fish into tiny pieces, feeling invisible. When it was time for toasts, no one handed me a microphone. When Charlotte opened gifts, I watched from a distance as she unwrapped the antique pearl earrings I'd worn at my own wedding. "These are nice," she said, barely glancing at them before moving to the next package. The little girl beside me tugged my sleeve. "Why are you crying?" I hadn't realized tears were sliding down my cheeks. I wiped them away with my napkin. "Sometimes," I told her, "grown-ups cry when no one's looking." The phone rang as I was watering my African violets, James's favorites, still blooming after all these years. "Grandma? It's Charlotte." I cradled the receiver. "Charlotte, how lovely to hear from you. I need to ask a favor." Her voice had that syrupy quality it took on whenever she wanted something. "It's about the wedding dress." I settled into my armchair, knees creaking. "What about it? I thought we'd already paid for it." The $20,000 check I'd written had cleared my account weeks ago. "Well, that's the thing. It doesn't fit right. Mom and Mrs. Whitmore think it doesn't complement my figure. And honestly, when I tried it on yesterday," she sighed dramatically. "It's all wrong, Grandma." I glanced at the framed photo on my side table. James in his Air Force uniform, arm around my waist, both of us laughing. He'd been gone for 38 years. "What are you asking, dear?" "I found another dress. It's perfect, but it costs $8,000. Daddy says their budget is maxed out with the venue and catering. $8,000. My emergency fund, the money set aside for when my ancient furnace inevitably failed, or if I needed medical care beyond what Medicare covered. That's quite a lot, Charlotte. I know, but it's your only granddaughter's wedding. Her voice hardened slightly. After all, it's not like you have other expenses. Your house is paid off, because I'd sold our family home to fund Richard's education, moving into this cramped apartment that smelled perpetually of the Indian restaurant downstairs. I'll need to check my accounts, I said, already knowing I'd give her the money. What else did I have to offer? The next day, Richard and Victoria stood in my kitchen while I wrote the check. Charlotte was too busy with wedding plans to come herself. "This is the minimum you could do," Victoria said, inspecting my chipped teacup with distaste. "Charlotte is your only grandchild." Richard pocketed the check without meeting my eyes. "We expect you at the final fitting next month." Benjamin, who'd driven them, lingered after they went to the car. "Mrs. Mason, I want you to know I appreciate what you're doing for Charlotte." "You're a good man, Benjamin," I said, seeing the discomfort in his eyes. "Take care of her." After they left, I called Harriet. We'd been friends since we taught together at Boston East High in 1968. "You gave them more money?" she asked incredulously. "What choice did I have?" "Eleanor, you can't keep enabling this behavior. Ever since James died, you've martyred yourself for that ungrateful son of yours." I watched through the window as Richard's Audi pulled away. He was just a boy when his father died. Perhaps I spoiled him to compensate. And now he's a 50-year-old man treating his mother like an ATM. I didn't tell Harriet that I'd transferred the last of my savings that morning, leaving just enough for next month's bills. I didn't tell her about the persistent pain in my chest that I couldn't afford to have checked. Some sacrifices were too shameful to share, even with your oldest friend. 3 Saturdays before the wedding, I arrived early for our family lunch. Victoria always prepared an elaborate meal, not because she enjoyed cooking, but because it gave her something to lord over others, particularly me, with my simple casseroles and homemade bread. I let myself in with the key Richard had reluctantly provided, for emergencies only. The house was quiet except for voices from the kitchen. Rather than announce myself, I paused in the hallway when I heard my name. "I can't believe Grandma fell for it," Charlotte was saying, laughter in her voice. "There was never anything wrong with the first dress." My hand froze on my purse. "She's always been easy to manipulate," Victoria replied. "Flash those big eyes of yours, and she forks over her retirement." Richard's voice now. "Did you see her face at the engagement dinner? Sitting there with the kids, eating her dry salmon?" Their laughter cut through me like glass. "But why make her sit with the children?" Benjamin's voice was lower, concerned. "It seemed unnecessary." "God, Ben, you don't understand." Charlotte's voice dripped with irritation. "She's exhausting. Always going on about her sacrifices. I sold the house for your father's education. I worked 60-hour weeks." "We get it," Victoria snorted. "Besides, she would have embarrassed us in front of your parents. She still wears those polyester pantsuits from the 90s. "I thought it was cruel," Benjamin insisted. "She's not going to live much longer anyway," Charlotte said dismissively. "Why does she need the money?" Richard cleared his throat. "After the wedding, we're putting her in that state facility in Brookline. We don't need to pretend we want her around anymore." "She thinks she's staying with us when her lease ends?" Victoria sounded horrified. "She asked, but I've been putting her off. The state home isn't fancy, but it's free. Why waste money on a private facility?" The wooden floor creaked beneath my weight as I shifted. I froze, but they continued, oblivious to my presence. "You guys, seriously?" Benjamin again. "She gave you her life savings." "Oh, please," Charlotte said. "Don't get all moral on us. You're not exactly complaining about the honeymoon she's paying for." I backed away silently, heart hammering against my ribs. My hand shook so badly I dropped my purse on the front step. I didn't stop to pick it up, just kept moving, one foot in front of the other, down the manicured suburban street. 3 blocks away, I collapsed onto a public bench, gulping air like I was drowning. An old woman in sensible shoes, invisible to the Saturday joggers and young families passing by. A state facility, where people went to die when no one wanted them anymore. I dug my cell phone from my pocket and called the only person who had never betrayed me. "Harriet, can you come get me?" My voice sounded strange, distant. "I need your help." When she pulled up 20 minutes later, I was still sitting there, my world reduced to ashes around me. "Eleanor," her face crumpled when she saw me. "What happened?" "Everything," I whispered, "and nothing I didn't already suspect." "You need tea," Harriet declared, bustling around her kitchen. "And whiskey, possibly both together." I sat at her table, still numb from what I'd overheard. I've been such a fool. Harriet slammed the kettle down. No, you've been a good mother to a bad son. There's a difference. She poured 2 fingers of Jameson into a mug, then added Earl Grey. The scent of bergamot and alcohol swirled between us. I've given them everything, I said. My savings, my retirement, the house James and I bought when we were newlyweds. And they've taken everything, Harriet finished, sitting across from me. So what will you do now? The whiskey burned down my throat. What can I do? I've already given Charlotte the money for the dress. My bank account is nearly empty. Harriet tapped her fingers against the table. What about James's paperwork? Didn't you tell me there were some financial documents you never sorted through after he died? That old trunk in my storage unit? It's just painful memories. Maybe, she said, but sometimes painful memories hold valuable secrets. The next morning, we drove to the storage facility where I kept the remnants of my former life. The small unit contained what little I hadn't sold: photo albums, James's military footlocker, boxes of Richard's childhood artwork I couldn't bear to discard. Harriet helped me drag out the battered trunk. Inside were James's discharge papers, our marriage certificate, old tax returns, and a sealed envelope I'd never noticed, addressed to me in James's handwriting, marked "Confidential, to be opened only by Eleanor Mason." My hands trembled as I broke the seal. "My darling Eleanor," the letter began. "If you're reading this, I've left you too soon. There's something I never told you, something I kept secret to protect you and Richard." I read aloud to Harriet how James had invested in an emerging technology company in the early 1980s, setting aside a portion of his military pension. He'd established an account with a Swiss bank, instructing his attorney Henry Goldman to manage it discreetly. "The account should only be revealed to you if you specifically inquire about additional assets or when you reach 75, the letter continued. "By then, the investments will have matured significantly." I was 80. 5 years passed when I should have been notified. "Goldman," Harriet murmured. "Wasn't he that old lawyer who died a few years back?" "His son David took over the practice," I said, mind racing. "But I never thought to ask about additional assets. Why would I? James and I were always practical people." At the bottom of the letter was an account number and the address of Goldman's law office. "We need to go there. Now," Harriet said, already gathering her purse. David Goldman was surprised to see us arrive without an appointment, but ushered us into his office when I mentioned his father and showed him the letter. "I remember my father mentioning this," he said, unlocking a filing cabinet. "He was waiting for you to reach out." He returned with a thick folder. The account was opened in 1982 with an initial investment of $25,000 in Microsoft stock, among others. "It's been actively managed by the bank according to your husband's instructions." "And the current value?" Harriet prompted when he hesitated. David adjusted his glasses. "As of last quarter's statement, approximately $1.2 million. The room tilted sideways. $1.2 million. All these years of scraping by, of denying myself even small comforts, of emptying my savings for Richard and Charlotte, while this fortune sat untouched in Switzerland." "Eleanor?" Harriet squeezed my hand. "Are you all right?" I straightened my spine, feeling something cold and unfamiliar crystallize inside me. "I'm perfectly fine," I said. "In fact, I've never been better." "First, we secure the money," Martha Goldstein said, tapping her fountain pen against a yellow legal pad. The attorney's office overlooked Boston Harbor, sunlight glinting off the water 30 floors below. I'd found Martha through David Goldman, a specialist in elder law with a reputation for ruthlessness wrapped in Chanel suits and pearl earrings. "The process to claim foreign accounts isn't simple," she continued. "We'll need to file through the IRS Voluntary Disclosure Program, pay back taxes, and reduced penalties." Harriet frowned. "Penalties? But Eleanor didn't know about the account." "Doesn't matter, but the penalties are manageable compared to the account value." Martha's perfectly manicured nails drummed against her desk. "Meanwhile, I recommend a complete audit of your finances before we proceed." I nodded, still adjusting to this new reality where my decisions actually mattered. "I'll need copies of all financial documents for the past 7 years," she said. "Bank statements, tax returns, property records, powers of attorney." "Powers of attorney?" I interrupted. "Yes. Did you grant anyone power of attorney over your affairs?" My mind flashed to that hospital room 3 years ago. Pneumonia, oxygen tubes, Richard presenting papers for me to sign so he could handle things while I recovered. My son, I said quietly, during my hospitalization in 2022, but it was temporary. Martha's expression sharpened. Did you ever revoke it? I tried to remember. The weeks after the hospital were a blur of exhaustion and medication. I don't think so. Then it's still active. She made a note. I'll need copies of those documents immediately. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of paperwork and revelations. Martha's investigator discovered Richard had used my power of attorney to secure 3 loans totaling $95,000 in my name. Loans I knew nothing about. This is fraud, Martha stated flatly when she showed me the documents. We can file criminal charges. I stared at Richard's forged signature beside my name. My son, the little boy who'd cried against my shoulder at his father's funeral. No, I said finally. No criminal charges. Martha arched an eyebrow. Mrs. Mason, what he did was illegal. I'm aware. I folded my hands in my lap. But I have something else in mind. That evening, Harriet and I sat on her porch swing, watching twilight settle over her garden. Are you sure about this? She asked. Once you start, there's no going back. I sipped my tea, thinking of Charlotte's laughter in that kitchen, of Richard planning to abandon me in a state facility, of decades of sacrifice met with contempt. They think I'm a doddering old fool, I said. I intend to show them exactly how wrong they are. Martha had already started the process to transfer the Swiss account, a complex procedure that would take several weeks. In the meantime, she'd helped me open a new account at a different bank, one Richard knew nothing about. What about the wedding? Harriet asked. It's less than 2 weeks away. I smiled, feeling a cold satisfaction unfurl within me. I think it's time to make some alterations to those plans. The next morning, I called Elegance Bridal Boutique, identified myself as the person who paid the deposit, and explained there had been a change of plans. I'd like to cancel the order for Charlotte Mason's second wedding dress, I said pleasantly. The first one will be sufficient after all. The manager protested about their no-refund policy, but when I mentioned misrepresentation and potential legal action, she quickly agreed to cancel the order, keeping only the 30% non-refundable deposit. I hung up feeling lighter than I had in years. The invisible old woman was finally making herself seen. Charlotte's scream echoed through the phone so loudly I had to hold it away from my ear. What do you mean they canceled my dress? The wedding is in 12 days. I settled deeper into my armchair, oddly calm. Apparently there was some confusion about the order. Confusion? Grandma, fix this. Call them back right now. I'm afraid I can't do that, Charlotte. A pause. Then, what do you mean you can't? I canceled the order myself. The silence that followed was deafening. You... What? Her voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. Why would you do that? Because there was never anything wrong with the first dress, was there? I kept my tone conversational. Just like there's nothing wrong with the state facility in Brookline where your father plans to dump me after your wedding. Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear the calculations happening in her head. Grandma, she finally said, her voice syrupy again. I don't know what you think you heard. I heard everything, Charlotte. 3 weeks ago when I arrived early for lunch, I heard how you manipulated the old fool for money. I heard your mother's contempt. I heard your father's plans. My front door buzzer rang. Richard, no doubt, summoned by his panicking daughter. Your father's here, I said. I'll buzz him up. Richard burst through my door moments later, not bothering to knock. His face was flushed, his tie askew. Mother, what the hell are you doing? I gestured to the chair across from me. Please sit down. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about. You need to call the boutique and fix this mess. I'm afraid that's not possible. The money has already been refunded. His face contorted. Where is it? Give me the check. It was a direct deposit to my new account. New account? What are you talking about? I smiled, remembering all the times he'd dismissed my concerns, talked over me, treated me like a child. I've made some changes, Richard. I'm not the same woman who sat at the children's table during Charlotte's engagement dinner. His expression shifted from anger to calculation. Mother, if you're upset about the seating arrangement, I'm upset about a great many things. I cut him off, including the loans you took out in my name using the power of attorney I signed when I was ill. The blood drained from his face. How did you? I know everything, I said quietly. The loans, the lies about Charlotte's dress, the plans for my future. I even know about the Brookline facility, the one with the pending state investigations for elder abuse. Richard sank into the chair, his bluster evaporating. You don't understand. Victoria and I are stretched thin with the wedding, a wedding I've largely financed. We were going to pay those loans back. Of course you were. I picked up a manila folder from my side table. My attorney has already revoked your power of attorney. She's also prepared documents for you to sign, acknowledging the debt and establishing a repayment plan. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Attorney? Since when do you have an attorney? Since I discovered I'm not as destitute as you led me to believe. I rose slowly, enjoying his confusion. You should prepare Charlotte for changes to the wedding. I won't be sitting at the children's table this time. Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face darkening. Victoria's panicking. The Whitmores are asking questions. I imagine they are. I walked to the door and opened it. You have choices to make. Richard, choose carefully. After he left, I poured myself a small sherry, James's favorite, and watched the sunset paint Boston's skyline gold and crimson. For the first time in decades, I felt a strange, fierce joy. The invisible woman was invisible no more. The wedding rehearsal was a masterpiece of strained smiles and nervous laughter. I arrived wearing a tailored navy suit I'd purchased with my new funds, no polyester in sight, and pearl earrings that matched the ones I'd given Charlotte. Richard and Victoria hovered anxiously, treating me with exaggerated deference now that they knew I held their social standing in my hands. Mother, we've seated you at the head table, of course, Richard announced loudly as the Whitmores approached, right between Charlotte and Benjamin. Victoria kissed my cheek, her eyes frantic. Eleanor, you look lovely. Is that a new outfit? Brand new, I confirmed. Like many things in my life recently, Benjamin's parents, Edward and Margaret Whitmore, greeted me warmly. Unlike my family, they'd always shown me genuine respect, perhaps recognizing in me a woman who'd built a career when it wasn't easy for women to do so. Eleanor, Margaret said, clasping my hands, Benjamin tells me you've been instrumental in making this wedding happen. More than anyone knows, I replied, watching Victoria stiffen beside me. During the rehearsal dinner, Richard stood to make a toast. His voice carried across the restaurant's private room. I'd like to recognize the family matriarch, my mother Eleanor, he said, raising his glass. Without her generosity and wisdom, we wouldn't be here tonight. He gestured for me to join him, desperation flickering behind his smile. This was damage control, an attempt to rewrite history before I could expose it. I rose slowly, feeling every eye in the room upon me. Harriet, seated at a nearby table, gave me an encouraging nod. Thank you, Richard, I said, taking the microphone. Family is everything to me. It always has been. I surveyed the room. Charlotte's friends from college, Benjamin's colleagues, distant relatives who'd rarely bothered to call. When my husband James died 38 years ago, I dedicated my life to ensuring my son had every opportunity. My voice remained steady. I sold our family home to finance his education. I worked 60-hour weeks as a school administrator. I postponed my own dreams. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. Richard's smile froze. I never complained about these sacrifices, I continued, but I've recently learned that sacrifice without respect becomes martyrdom, and I am no one's martyr. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I caught Benjamin's eye. He gave me a slight nod of approval. To Charlotte and Benjamin, I raised my glass. May your marriage be built on honesty and mutual respect, and may all of us gathered here receive exactly what we deserve in life. I returned to my seat amidst uncertain applause. Across the table, Charlotte stared at her plate, face flushed. Later, as guests mingled over dessert, I overheard snippets of conversation. Did you see how they treated her at the engagement dinner? I heard they were planning to put her in a home after the wedding. All that money she gave them, and they can't even be bothered to show basic respect. The whispers followed Richard and Victoria like shadows. Their carefully constructed social facade was cracking. Benjamin approached me as I prepared to leave. Mrs. Mason, he said quietly, I want you to know I've always been uncomfortable with how they treat you. I know, Benjamin. I heard you defend me that day in the kitchen. He looked surprised. You heard that? I heard everything. I patted his arm. You're a good man. Better than my daughter-in-law deserves. Charlotte is changing, he insisted. This situation, it's forcing her to reevaluate things. I hope so, I said, for both your sakes. As Harriet drove me home, she glanced over with concern. Are you all right? I watched the city lights blur past the window. I feel like I've awakened from a long sleep, I said, and I'm not sure I recognize the woman I've become. I do, Harriet replied firmly. She's the Eleanor I've always known was in there, strong, dignified, unwilling to be anyone's doormat. For the first time in decades, I believed her. Victoria's campaign began subtly. A concerned look when I misplaced my reading glasses, a gentle correction when I mentioned the wrong date for an upcoming fitting. Small seeds of doubt planted in careful conversations. "Richard, your mother seemed a bit confused about which day it is," she said loudly at the final menu tasting. "Should we be concerned?" I pretended not to hear, but I understood the strategy. If I couldn't be silenced, I would be discredited. "The specialists call it sundowner syndrome," Victoria told Margaret Whitmore over appetizers. "Perfectly lucid during the day, but evenings can be challenging." I buttered my roll, keeping my expression neutral. Charlotte watched the exchange with growing discomfort, caught between family loyalty and her new awareness. Harriet confirmed my suspicions the next day. "They're telling everyone you're having episodes," she reported after speaking with mutual acquaintances. Not quite saying dementia, but implying it. Something cold and hard crystallized within me. I'd been willing to offer a path to reconciliation, but this crossed a line. "Call Martha," I told Harriet. "It's time for the next phase." 2 days later, Martha's office sent formal notifications to 3 entities: the banks that had issued loans in my name, the compliance department at Richard's accounting firm, and the state board that licensed financial professionals. Each letter detailed the same facts. Richard Mason had used a medical power of attorney to secure loans in his mother's name without her knowledge or consent. The letters requested investigations into these concerning irregularities. I didn't frame it as fraud. That word never appeared. I simply presented facts and asked questions, knowing that in Richard's profession, questions alone could be devastating. The response was swift. Richard called me from his office, his voice a harsh whisper. "What have you done?" "The managing partner just called me in. There's an internal audit." "I've done nothing but seek clarity about financial decisions made in my name," I replied calmly. "This could ruin me. They're talking about suspension pending investigation." How unfortunate. Rather like being sent to a state facility in Brookline against one's will. His breathing was ragged. "You're destroying our family." "No, Richard. You did that the moment you decided your mother was disposable." I hung up, hands shaking. The satisfaction I'd expected was there, but accompanied by a hollow ache. This was my son, the boy I'd raised alone, the child who'd once brought me dandelion bouquets and handmade Mother's Day cards. Victoria called next, her composure finally shattered. "You vindictive old witch! Do you have any idea what you've done?" "The Whitmores are asking questions. The wedding might be postponed." "Perhaps that's for the best," I said. "It would give Charlotte time to reconsider marrying into a family built on lies." That evening, alone in my apartment, I stared at old photographs spread across my coffee table. Richard as a toddler on James's shoulders. Richard's high school graduation. His wedding to Victoria when I'd still believed he married for love. The triumph of revenge tasted increasingly bitter. I'd wanted justice, but was I becoming as callous as those who had hurt me? When my phone rang again, I almost didn't answer, but it was Benjamin. "Mrs. Mason," he sounded exhausted. "I need to talk to you about what's happening." "Benjamin, I'm sorry you've been caught in the crossfire." "It's not that," he said. "It's Charlotte. She's breaking down. Says she doesn't know who her parents really are anymore." He paused. "Or who she is, for that matter." I closed my eyes, remembering Charlotte as a little girl, before Victoria's influence had fully taken hold. "Tell her I'm still the grandmother who taught her to make snickerdoodles," I said softly. "That hasn't changed." After we hung up, I sat in the dark, listening to the distant sounds of the city. The power I'd seized felt increasingly heavy in my hands. 3 months after the wedding was indefinitely postponed, I moved into a sunlit apartment overlooking the harbor. The Swiss account had been successfully transferred, minus substantial tax payments and penalties, leaving me with approximately $750,000. More money than I'd ever imagined possessing. Richard's professional situation had deteriorated. Suspended from his firm pending investigation, he was now doing contract work at a fraction of his former salary. Victoria had filed for separation, unwilling to adjust to their new financial reality. Harriet visited me regularly, bringing homemade scones and sharp observations. "You've lost weight," she noted, pouring tea, "and not in a good way." I gazed out at the boats dotting the harbor. I should feel vindicated. Instead, I feel hollow. Revenge is like that, Harriet said. Sweet at first, then it curdles. I touched the framed photo of James I'd placed on my new mantle. What would he think of me now? He'd think you finally stood up for yourself. She set down her cup with a decisive clink. But he'd also think you're becoming obsessed with punishment rather than healing. Her words stung because they were true. I'd begun checking Richard's professional status daily, searching for news about the investigation. I'd driven past their house twice, noting with satisfaction that the lawn was unmowed, Victoria's prized roses untended. I'm turning into them, I whispered. Not yet, Harriet said, but you're standing at the edge of that abyss. That evening, Benjamin called. These conversations had become regular over the past months, an unexpected bridge between fractured family members. Charlotte wants to see you, he said, without preamble. My heart stuttered. She does? She's been in therapy. It's bringing up a lot about how she was raised, the values she absorbed from Victoria. I twisted the phone cord around my finger, a nervous habit from decades past. Where would we meet? Your new place? Tomorrow afternoon? After hanging up, I wandered through my apartment, seeing it suddenly through Charlotte's eyes. Would she notice the quality furnishings I'd denied myself for decades? Would she resent this tangible evidence of my newfound security? Charlotte arrived precisely at 2, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, nothing like the designer outfits Victoria had always insisted upon. Grandma, she said, hovering awkwardly in the doorway, your place is beautiful. I gestured her inside. It's nice to have a view after all these years. We sat in uncomfortable silence, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between us. I'm sorry, she finally blurted, about everything, the dress, the things I said, how we treated you. I studied her face, so like Richard's, yet with something of James around the eyes. I heard horrible things coming out of my mouth, she continued, twisting her engagement ring. Things that sounded like Mom, not me. I didn't even recognize myself. We often become what we're surrounded by, I said carefully. That's what my therapist says. She attempted a smile. I've been learning about generational patterns, how Mom's materialism shaped me, how Dad's relationship with money became mine. Outside, seagulls wheeled against the blue sky. I thought of all the times I'd wanted to guide Charlotte away from Victoria's influence, but had stayed silent to keep the peace. I shouldn't have taken your money, she said, voice breaking. I shouldn't have laughed about manipulating you. It makes me sick to think about it now. And yet you did those things, I said quietly. We all need to own our actions, Charlotte, not just our regrets. She nodded, tears spilling. I'm trying to be better. Ben's helping me. He almost broke off our engagement when everything happened. He's a good man. Better than I deserve. She hesitated. Dad's struggling. He might lose his license. I felt the familiar surge of satisfaction, immediately followed by shame. That's the consequence of his choices. I know, but he's still my father. And your son. The simple truth of her words penetrated the armor I'd built around my heart. Richard was still my son, the baby I'd nursed through colic, the boy I'd comforted after nightmares, the young man I'd launched into the world with such hope. As Charlotte left, promising to visit again, I realized vengeance had consumed too much of my remaining years. It was time to find a different path forward, one that neither absolved them of responsibility nor surrendered my newfound strength. But first, I needed to face Richard. Revere Park looked exactly as it had 30 years ago when I'd brought Richard here to feed the ducks. The same weathered benches, the same placid pond, the same weeping willows trailing their fingers in the water. I chose a bench with good sight lines and a back straight enough to support my aging spine. The September air carried just a hint of the coming autumn, James's favorite season. Richard arrived 10 minutes late, looking thinner than I remembered. His formerly impeccable appearance had slipped, his shirt needed ironing, and his hair was overdue for a cut. Mother, he said, settling beside me without offering a kiss or embrace. Charlotte said you wanted to meet. Thank you for coming. He glanced around, perhaps seeking witnesses or preparing an escape route. My lawyer advised against this. I'm sure he did. Mine as well. We sat in silence, watching a young mother chase her toddler across the grass, each step wobbly but determined. I went too far, I finally said, with the complaints to your firm and the licensing board. He turned to me, surprise evident. You're admitting that? I'm not above acknowledging my mistakes. I met his gaze. Unlike some people. He flinched, but didn't respond. I wanted you to feel what I felt, I continued. The helplessness, the betrayal, the fear of having your future decided by someone who sees you as inconvenient. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. You took out loans in my name. You planned to discard me in a facility with documented abuse cases. You treated me as less than human. Richard stared at his hands. Victoria pushed for much of it. And you allowed it, just like you allowed her to seat me at the children's table. A young couple strolled past, their hands intertwined, oblivious to our quiet reckoning. I resented you, Richard said abruptly. Growing up, you were always working, always saving, always sacrificing, and reminding me of it. I was raising you alone after your father died. I know that intellectually, but emotionally, he shook his head. It felt like the sacrifices were more important to you than I was, like I was a project, not a son. His words struck deeper than I expected. Had I been so focused on providing materially that I'd neglected his emotional needs? That doesn't excuse what you did as an adult, I said firmly. No, it doesn't. He rubbed his face. I'm losing everything, Mother. My career, my marriage, Victoria's filing for divorce. I know. The investigation could last years. Even if I'm not criminally charged, my professional reputation is destroyed. He looked at me directly. Was that what you wanted? The question hung between us, demanding honesty. At first, yes, I admitted. I wanted you to suffer as I had suffered. But now I just want peace. Peace, he repeated, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. I'm 80 years old, Richard. I don't know how many years I have left. I don't want to spend them consumed by bitterness. A flock of geese passed overhead, their formation a perfect V against the blue sky. I'll testify that I gave implied consent for those loans, I said finally. I won't press charges or seek repayment, but I have conditions. His posture straightened, the accountant in him automatically calculating assets and liabilities. What conditions? First, family therapy. Real therapy, not just a show for appearances. He grimaced, but nodded. Second, a public apology. To me, to Charlotte, to Benjamin, and his family for the wedding chaos. Victoria won't agree to that. Then you'll do it without her. Third, I leaned closer. You will never again suggest placing me in any facility against my will. When I need care, if I need care, I will decide where and how. Richard was silent for a long moment. Is that all? No. One more thing. I took a deep breath. I want my son back. Not the man who saw me as a burden, but the boy who once loved me. I don't know if that's possible, but I'd like to try. His eyes glistened unexpectedly. I don't know if I remember how to be that person. Then we'll figure it out together. I stood, my knees protesting the movement. That's what family does. The real kind, not the version you and Victoria created. As I walked away, Richard called after me. Mother? I turned. I am sorry. Truly. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Cape Cod in summer had always been James's dream. Someday, he'd promised, we'll have a little place near the water. We'll watch sunsets from the porch and collect shells at low tide. For my 81st birthday, I finally fulfilled that dream. The cottage wasn't large, 3 bedrooms, a sun-filled kitchen, and a wraparound porch with Adirondack chairs facing the ocean. But it was mine, paid for with the money James had so presciently set aside. It's perfect, Harriet declared, helping me arrange shells we'd collected that morning on the windowsill. James would have loved it. Yes, I agreed. He would have. Outside, the birthday gathering was beginning. Charlotte and Benjamin arrived first, bringing a homemade cake and fresh flowers from their garden. They'd married 6 months earlier in a simple ceremony at Benjamin's family church, with me as Charlotte's matron of honor. The rest of the guests trickled in. Neighbors I'd befriended, former colleagues from my teaching days, even David Goldman and his wife. Richard arrived last, alone. His divorce from Victoria had been finalized 3 months earlier. Happy birthday, Mother, he said, kissing my cheek and presenting a small, wrapped package. The house looks wonderful. Our relationship remained a work in progress. The weekly therapy sessions had been brutal at first, excavating decades of resentment and misunderstanding. Richard's professional situation had stabilized somewhat. He'd avoided criminal charges thanks to my testimony, but his reputation remained damaged. He now worked for a small nonprofit, handling their finances, earning a fraction of his former salary. Dinner's almost ready, I said. Charlotte's setting up on the deck. The remaining money from James's account, about $650,000 after taxes and the house purchase, I'd placed in a trust for family education and healthcare expenses. Harriet served as co-trustee, a safeguard against old patterns reasserting themselves. As we gathered around the table, I looked at the faces surrounding me. Charlotte, laughing at something Benjamin whispered in her ear. Richard, more relaxed than I'd seen him in years, the burden of pretense finally lifted. Harriet, my steadfast friend through darkness and light. Before we eat, I said, raising my glass, I'd like to make a toast. They quieted, turning toward me with an attention that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. To second chances, I said, and to James, who made all of this possible. After dinner, while others chatted on the porch, I slipped away to the small memorial garden I'd planted for James near the property's edge. A granite marker bore his name, and the simple epitaph, "Love endures." Richard found me there, hands in his pockets, face softened by the golden hour light. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately," he said. "So have I. Do you think he would have approved of how everything turned out?" I considered the question carefully. I think he would have been heartbroken by how far we drifted apart. But yes, I think he would approve of where we've landed. Richard knelt to adjust a windblown marigold near the marker. "I'm sorry I lost sight of what matters." We all did, in different ways. In the distance, Charlotte called that they were serving cake. Richard offered his arm to help me navigate the uneven ground back to the house. "I'm glad you fought back," he said unexpectedly, "when we treated you badly. I didn't see it then, but you taught Charlotte an important lesson about self-respect." "I taught myself that lesson too," I replied, rather late in life. Back on the porch, surrounded by people who now saw me, truly saw me, I caught Harriet's knowing smile across the gathering. The journey from invisible to formidable had been painful, but necessary. Later, as guests departed with leftovers and birthday hugs, I stood on my porch watching the sun sink into the Atlantic. The horizon blazed with impossible colors, orange, pink, purple. Before surrendering to the approaching night, James had been right about the sunsets. In my hand, I held his photograph and the small box Richard had given me. Inside, my original wedding band that I'd sold decades ago to pay for Richard's college textbooks. He'd tracked it down through 3 different owners. "I used your gift to rebuild, not destroy," I whispered to James's image. "My legacy isn't the money or the revenge, but the truth that finally set us free." The first stars appeared above the darkening ocean. At 81, I had no illusions about how many sunsets remained in my future. But for the first time in decades, I looked forward to each one with a heart unburdened by resentment and filled instead with hard-won peace. Not perfect, but honest. Not what I'd planned, but perhaps what I'd needed all along. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.